Good evening, everyone. My name is David Andrusia, and I'm the Executive Director of the March on Washington Film Festival. Good to see you all tonight. And welcome to the panel discussion on Nayla Jefferson's film, Descended from the Promised Land, The Legacy of Black Wall Street. We're pleased to have you here tonight. You know, at the March on Washington Film Festival, we're devoted to showing films about the untold events and the icons and foot soldiers of the civil rights movement. This is especially germane as we discuss the Tulsa Race Massacre, whose effects have been multi-generational and which has been swept under the rug by too many teachers of history up to this very day. In fact, you may have heard President Biden say just a few weeks ago in a public forum that this was not a riot, but it was a massacre, and it must be remembered as such. That's why this film and tonight's panel are especially important. We'd like to thank our friends at Odyssey Impact for making the film and panel possible tonight. Thank you very much. And with that said, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator for the evening, Ms. Rachel Watanabe-Batten. Rachel is an independent TV and film producer and head of her own company, Contradiction and Struggle. Rachel, welcome and good evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much, David. And hello to everyone. Welcome to our panel tonight. As David mentioned, we are here to talk about Descended from the Promised Land, The Legacy of Black Wall Street. It is particular pleasure to be able to work with both the March on Washington Film Festival, who we are indebted to commemorate the centennial of the Tulsa Race Massacre, the 100th anniversary. This evening's discussion, as David mentioned, will center on the short film Descended from the Promised Land, The Legacy of Black Wall Street. And I say it again because it is not taught in schools enough. It's really my pleasure to moderate today's panel on behalf of Transform Films and also Odyssey Impact. And if you're wondering who those two are, those two organizations, excuse me for moving back and forth, it is Transform Films is a Peabody Award-winning film company that produced the film, Descended from the Promised Land. And Odyssey Impact is a nonprofit organization that is leading the National Social Impact Campaign for the film. They are just at the start of this, so you will have this entire month to really engage with them. The Social Impact Campaign will uplift the generational impact of the Tulsa Race Massacre and the ongoing harm perpetuated against survivors and descendants of this massacre. As David said, my name is Rachel Watanabe-Batten. I am an independent producer and I have a production company called Contradiction and Struggle. And we focus on stories that are really about underrepresented communities and reframing historical tales and thus the truth. Tonight's conversation in that vein will focus on critical themes uplifted within the film, including generational trauma, healing, and transformation. So I would just give you a short description. Excuse me, I'm having a little trouble with my paper being very noisy. I apologize. Transform Films is a Peabody Award-winning film company that produced the film, as I mentioned. And the year-long National Social Impact Campaign you can learn more about it at Odyssey, ODYSSEY -impact, IMPACT.org. All right, so without further ado, I'd love to introduce our panelists and as well as our filmmaker, director, Nayla Jefferson, who is the director of Descended from the Promised Land, The Legacy of Black Wall Street. Hi, Nayla, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here to discuss the film. It's so important. And to have the descendants with us as well.
For sure. I'm sure we're going to hear more from you about exactly, but I'm a big fan of your work. And I look forward to sharing this film with everyone who has not seen it yet. Please tune in. Our next panelist is a descendant of Black Wall Street, and that is Jacqueline Blocker. Hello, Jacqueline.
Hello. Hello, Rachel.
Okay.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here this evening and be a part of the amazing work that Miss Jefferson did. It was phenomenal working with her, so thank you.
Naila has, included both you and your sister in the film. I don't think I said that before, and that I'd love to introduce Michelle Blocker, who is also a descendant of Black Wall Street and featured in the film. I think.
Here I am.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you. Really welcome. It is an honor to be able to just meet you, after seeing this film. I've had so many thoughts and reflections about my own communities, and I say multiple rather than various places, and what that legacy is. So thank you for reframing all of this for us, Naila, and of course, Michelle and Jacqueline as part of the community and the efforts going on. I'm not sure, but I believe that Chief Amason is also here with us, which is wonderful. Chief Amason, welcome. He's the community leader in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and co-founder and owner of the Real Black Wall Street Tour. And he will also help us with some historical timelines as we move forward with this discussion. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for your work with relation to this film and the Impact Campaign, but moreover in your daily lives and how you live them. I want to just kind of acknowledge and should set before we kind of talk about the film itself and my question, a little bit of the history, which perhaps Chief Amundsen can get into a little bit more, but really just to set the context of, Oklahoma as a pre-statehood, as a place of, tremendous migration for Black people from the South. And also the fact that this was an oil town. This was a boom, the thinking about the United States and opportunity and, not after the Civil War and emancipation, but then throughout this. And that as we think about what's happening today and technology and all the things that change, also thinking about that within the context and framework of Tulsa and what would make a Black Wall Street. And so I'm actually going to just say, a history, a little bit of, as we all know, many of us know there was the Red Summer, 1919. There were many, many other race riots. This is not what so-called riots, and it's significant that this is now being called a massacre. So I want to also note that in David's reference earlier. So this film is in context with what is happening today, and very, very compelling. And so with that, I'll start out by asking Naila Jefferson, can you share with us what compelled you to tell this story of Black Wall?
Well, I'd heard about Rosewood, I remember when I was in high school. Maybe that was the first time I was introduced to what was going on, what had happened in a lot of these thriving Black communities. And so as I got older, I started to learn more, and I learned a little bit about the Tulsa Race Massacre. But it was always something that stayed with me. New Orleans, where I'm from, we had our own race massacre as well. And so I was very aware that these were happening around the country, but I didn't have a lot of information about the details. And Transform reached out to me and asked me if I was interested in making this short documentary. And I didn't realize that we were coming upon 100 years. And so I started to do some research because, I I'd like to know about what I'm going into and not just say yes and know that I can serve the project as best I can. And so when I started to research, I understood that it was, we were coming into the 100th year anniversary. And then I realized just how much the story had been suppressed in Tulsa itself. And I thought that that's how I could be useful as a filmmaker in helping families that are descended from Black Wall Street, or the Promised Land, as it was referred to at one point in time, as Black people were flocking there. But I thought that I could help amplify and uplift these stories, and so that's one reason why I wanted to do it, and then really draw a through line from 1921 to 2021, because I think a lot of times when we hear about historical events, we want to leave them in the past, but the repercussions are still felt today, as we hear the stories of Jacqueline and Michelle, Byron, who's another descendant who is in the film. So I just wanted to make this film to make sure that people realize that the effects are still being felt, and that this is a massacre that occurred in 1921, but it still has not been resolved. There still has not been any reparations, any real reconciliation, and so we still have work to do.
How did you go about, you first said you did your own research, of course, and then, we're joined here by Jacqueline and Michelle Blocker, who clearly, made themselves available. How did you go about actually, in terms of your approach, creating an environment that was welcoming for the Blockers and other descendants, and as well as the community, and having access to a conversation that's really been suppressed for so many years?
Well, Rachel, you probably know as a filmmaker, access is key, right? And relationships are key. And we didn't have a lot of time. So I think what you have to do is go in and just let your intentions be known. And people have a choice. They can receive and want to participate or not. And I think as a filmmaker, you kind of just have to be respectful of that, period, because it's their story. But I'm happy that they were receptive, that Jacqueline, Michelle, and their mother were receptive to allowing us to tell their stories. And we were actually introduced, Jacqueline and I, through Dr. Reverend Turner, who is in the film as well. But I'm so happy he made the introduction, because from Jacqueline, I was able to meet Michelle and their wonderful mother. And I love being able to have Black women tell the story of a Black woman in their family who was a business owner and entrepreneur. And I love the conversation that you all have around the table, where, they really did allow me in. I just felt really honored that they felt they could be comfortable and honest in themselves in front of the camera. And, we just do the work that we can. Like I said, we're honest. We tried to tell them the intention of the story, and they showed up. And I really think they delivered on behalf of their great grandmother, who was a businesswoman. And so I'm sure that she's smiling down and just very proud of them.
May I say something about that? I would like to give a lot of credit to Odyssey and to Transform Films for being very intentional about having an all-Black crew. I do think that, unbeknownst to me, and I don't want to speak for my sister, but I do think that helped in sharing the story and being comfortable with sharing the story, because I didn't know what I was getting myself into. We hadn't talked about it, but it was the setting made it comfortable to want to share our family story with them. So I do want to give credit to Transform Films and to Odyssey for being intentional about that, because I think for me it did add a little bit to the comfort, and I didn't even know that would make a difference, but it did.
Mm-hmm. I would give a shout out to obviously both Naila and to Michelle Budnick, a producer at Transform, who's also my friend, of full disclosure. And it, I do. It is difficult still to have these conversations. Very, and I have my own family stories, which I shared with you about internment camps. I would, and it's delicate to open up. So, both to Jacqueline and Michelle, what brought you to want to be able to share these stories? And also, the conversation with your mother, first of all, is, as Neela says, amazing, because it is this, like, you're all in sync. And to see you all there, right? And even how, in the different landscapes, and then in the intimacy of the home. That's one thing, Neela, that I really love about your filmmaking, is that we get to see people in many contexts, and the fullness thus is given to them, and their voice is really clear. It's not, I'm never thinking, what are they saying? I'm really present when you are having people speak. So in that, I would like to be present as I ask my question of Jacqueline and Michelle. What did you want to convey when you decided to join in this film?
Well, I personally, we were given the platform to tell our great grandmother's story, Miss Leona Corbett, and I feel like we wanted to give more of a voice to her and her community. And I feel like with Odyssey Impact, they kind of we were the voice, and then they gave us the body, and then this was produced. And I personally, and I think for my sister as well, to put a humanity attached to this massacre, it's very easy to look at it and say, oh, this happened. But when you get to really know the generational feelings behind the people that, are descendants of it, I feel like it just puts more of a depth and humanity to it. And you almost feel like you can get to know our great grandmother through this story. And it put a lot more of an impact on the demise of Black Wall Street.
Yeah, that was so well said, Michelle. Only thing I will add, I think, like she said, it was more to honor the memory of a Black Indigenous female business owner in that day and time, and to highlight the fact that these were successful entrepreneurs that were resilient and did it on their own. And as, and to connect those dots about what was lost in that transformation. But we definitely did it to honor our great grandmother and our grandmother, and really did it for our mother. And also to give maybe hope to people to see what was done and to figure out, how can we do this again? That's another thing for me, is to really highlight, it was community. There was a sense of community that was there, and that's why Black Wall Street was successful. And so I think that is another important aspect, is that it's important to know the history, but also to think about what we can do to work together to rebuild.
Yeah, very much. And, with that, I would say this is a good time to bring in Chief Amason, who is, your work with the community, is, and you have I've seen many types of work that you're doing, films as well. Jarnell Martin, I know, and I'm a big fan of her work as well, so thank you, for the work you do. And I guess, tell us, to the folks and to myself, how would you describe the work that you do, the community work for the Real Black Wall Street Tour? And you're also an entrepreneur, so I find that an interesting aspect of it, as well as your history. If you could speak to those things.
Well, first, as a descendant, I'll speak on that behalf. And I'd like to also thank you all for the privilege of sitting amongst phenomenal women. That's kind of been the the story for the past few weeks, you know, and as it relates to everything that's happening in this space. And the work is huge. I mean, this project, the promise, the dream, you know, when you put all these things together. But historically, this is a continuation of something, right? Like a couple of weeks ago, I had the chance to testify before Congress as a descendant, along with Viola Fletcher and the other survivors. And one of the things that came to mind for me was, we, even as much as we think we know about this narrative or this story, we still in our own ways have marginalized the magnificence of it. Like just looking at the history of Lula Williams, you know, like we call her, we try to find the right words, right, to try to define these phenomenal people that have left their mark on this earth. And even entrepreneur is small, you know, for someone of her caliber, right? Like she did. I mean, that's the godmother of Greenwood. You know, that's the person who said, you know, like all the things we use today, Black excellence, multiple streams of income, you know, these things, that was a normalcy. And that personality, that cultural acceptance and acknowledgement is something those are the things that's missing from the element. Like we put too much emphasis on the material and financial aspect of it, that we forget. Someone just mentioned that it wasn't money that built Greenwood. It was that cultural understanding, cooperative economics, and collective responsibility. You know, all of these things that made, you can put money in anybody's hands, but if you don't have a base, a foundation to build off of, it could be fruitless, right? And so we're in a remarkable place right now, and the momentum that we're in, the timing for this film, there could not be a better time. I mean, and just to have so many voices, the voices of people who are descendants, to have them, put them in a place where they can be tangible, right? Like the story is magnificent that you all are featured in, because it gives you your sense of humanity. It makes the world see who we are, because we are, you know, we're the manifestation of those people that we talk about. And so it's just a really remarkable place to be in right now.
We all have much work to do. I think you've said it so well in terms of the community and what it is that we're doing, because obviously we all pick up and do above and beyond, and that always seems normal, right? That is just what we're taught to do. And overachieving is just the norm in many ways. And I don't think we are some of the most inventive people on the planet. And I always think from the history, the legacy even of slavery, who do you think were the experts at everything and who did all the work? And that's so right. It's really, that seed and the competition for labor are really the need to then destroy or create or erase the history. So, because it is so in the face of the idea of the American dream or a melting, and all of these themes that we all grew up with. I mean, I'm in New York City, so-called melting pot, right?
Right.
And I live in Washington Heights, in the Heights. When we're like, finally, we're getting our own flair. But I know that because, I'm like, oh, unless you say oye, it's not authentic to me, because I hear that, which, by the way, means listen. And that's part of, I like to live here because people are not downtrodden. They are doing their business. They are living. They are free as best they can be. And so I think that is also a context to determine, self-determination. Jacqueline, in terms of the Tulsa Race Massacre, which is rarely taught in schools, I mean, really rarely, why is it important to share the history in Tulsa, educational institutions, in Tulsa, in their educational institutions and throughout the United States and frankly, the world?
Well, as we know, my father always told us that history is important because if we don't know our history, then we're doomed to keep making the mistakes of history. So we have to know what has happened. And in Tulsa in particular, for me, it's important for the Blacks and the indigenous people to know what greatness once existed here. The individuals that built up Black Wall Street and then built it up again after its destruction were freedmen. They were indigenous people coming together and building up this beautiful community. And so I feel like knowing that you come from that and that existed once before for children could be a sense of pride and knowing that they could accomplish anything. Now, if their circle is so limited, if all they can see is what they can see, then that stunts hope. So for me, and I think for many others, knowing the history of Black Wall Street and the greatness and knowing that how much wealth was here, before even with Tulsa and Black Wall Street, there were 50 Black towns and settlements that were wealthy and had their own communities and self-sufficient and were thriving. And now it's about 13. I think it's down to 13 now. So, I mean, just knowing about Black Wall Street and that greatness is so important. As we know, in a lot of the conservative states now, there are all of these bills that have been passed to stop the teaching of critical race theory, which threatens being able to teach things that are about Black Wall Street and the massacre and Red Summer. So it's more critical than ever to have documentaries such as this to make sure that we are not only preserving the history and to teach our youth where they come from, but to also let them know that we can reinvent this, you can do this, you can strive, and you can have different streams of income. You can be an entrepreneur, but it is about that sense of community and coming together and collective wealth. And that has to be taught from knowing your history, but not getting stuck there and knowing, okay, where do we go from here? So to me, education is critical, but you have to know the whole story. It cannot be just part of the story. We don't teach enough about the Trail of Tears here and all of the struggles with that. So all of the history is important, and knowing where Oklahoma came from and all of the greatness that existed once before in the original Black Wall Street.
Absolutely.
Yes, sure. I think, it's, maybe we could go back a little bit in the history of Oklahoma as we're there now. Most of us have heard of the Trail of Tears. Maybe Chief Amason or whichever of you feel most like it could kind of take us back to, I mean, I understand from what my family used to tell me, and I've heard other places, that at one time, Oklahoma, they considered it becoming a Black state. There were so many people migrating there. And
Right.
in many ways, because it wasn't a state and they were not, they didn't have barriers to success and opportunity in the same way, right? State sanctioned oppression, it was freer. And so I find that, it's an interesting contradiction, right? And one that Black each day, for whom and who should be safe. So maybe you could take us through a little bit about sort of what Oklahoma looked like. We've seen the pictures of how beautiful, how prosperous, how community, the social clubs, and, a setting of, in some ways, that is an existence that is due to segregation, of course, as well. Do you mind delving into that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a good. I'm glad you mentioned that. Okay, and we do have to go back a little bit, and I'll try to summarize it. Indian Removal Act. The 5 civilized tribes are moved to Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Territory, and you have the 5 so-called civilized tribes who came to Oklahoma, but they didn't come alone, and most people are not aware of this. They came as slaves, enslaved people, enslaved Africans of those tribes who came to Oklahoma. Like we're about to start Juneteenth celebrations. But the reality in Oklahoma is a little different from the rest of the world because those 17 to 20,000 African slaves, they weren't even freed till after Juneteenth, 2 years after Juneteenth. You got the 1866 treaty that all of the tribes had to adhere to, as it relates to, you know, their agreement with the federal government. Not all the tribes entertained the treaty. They didn't. Those treaties weren't enforced. And those were some of the things I mentioned to Congress. You know, you had like the Chickasaw tribe. The Chickasaw tribe didn't entertain any aspect of their treaty. So they had people who were without a country on Indian territory, on Indian land, without a country for 40 years. They were neither American citizens or native citizens. In fact, many of them said, don't even call us freedmen, because we don't even have the rights of free people. So you have tribes like the Creek, for example, where Greenwood is located, the Greenwood Historic District. The Creek, they gave out land allocations after the emancipation of their enslaved Africans. So let's say I have a family of 5. Within each member of my family was allocated 160 acres of land. That's a lot of land when you think about all of those, you know, newly freed people. What happens is those people who find themselves on this land end up finding oil and find out that they have oil on their land. And you instantly have people like Sarah Rector, right? This little 14-year-old beautiful black girl who's a millionaire at 14. And she is like the voice of, the poster child of America as it relates to entrepreneur, financial influence, right? And people like Du Bois and Booker T. Washington heard about her, took her to Tuskegee, gave her every ounce of education that she deserved so she could manage her own wealth. So in this little process, there's a lot of complicated things that happen throughout the history. And you have all of these newly freed Africans who now discover an incubator state where they can finally detox themselves from chattel slavery, not from just Europeans, but native people too, right? Now you have this opportunity to truly liberate yourself, because in Oklahoma, the only people who could own land were black people and Indians, right? So 1892, Edwin McCabe, who came to Oklahoma, he said, listen, I think we should make this an all-black state. Of course, that opportunity was undermined. He happens to be the founder of Langston, Oklahoma, where you have the only HBCU in Oklahoma, Langston University. You have these series of events that take place. Now you start to accumulate all of this wealth, and all these black people become extremely wealthy. Like was previously mentioned, you had 27 black towns pre-statehood, right? And so you got this. A lot of people who are historians will write or erroneously say we were forced to spend amongst each other once Jim Crow was enacted. But that using that language, forced, implies that we were not already willing to spend with each other. Like that was a pleasure for us to do, not an enforcement, right? And so if anything, Jim Crow was a stimulus package, right? It stimulated our growth. I think it was unattended, that punishment, it didn't play out like they expected it to. So we accumulated a lot of wealth from that. Well, the federal government realized what was happening, right? They said, wait a minute, these people are discovering all this oil. We're gonna have to figure out a way to get this land back. There's no way we can have all of these black people and all these millionaires and all these black townships and settlements popping up, because if you take over one state and we're already outnumbered, what's gonna be the influence, right? What's gonna be the national influence that Greenwood is gonna create? It was already creating influence, but what could this spark? That is what had to get crushed. So you have 1905, you have the Dawes Act coming into place. Dawes Act is put into place to basically rip the land back from black people. And they have this thing called guardianship, where black folks are deemed unfit or mentally unstable and cannot manage their own affairs. So they have to take on white guardians according to new laws. And those guardians can say anything. They can say, hey, this person's, they don't know how to handle their finances, or they don't have the mental stability or wherewithal. I mean, you didn't need much. When you control the government, you don't need much anyway. And so basically land was stripped away from black people, taxation without representation, right? You had all these things that were starting to take place that forced, that really made us become stronger. We had to really become more cohesive and figure out ways we had to find ways to counter all these events that were being encroached on us to basically strip land away from us, right? And laws were put into place that said black men couldn't marry into Indian families or Indian women, but only white men could, or full-blooded Indians could marry each other, right? So you put all these things and these measures in place that basically prevent us from owning land. So that's a good summary.
A very good summary. And, I would say that those things, of course, continue. My own mom was in the internment camps for Japanese Americans in Heart Mountain, Wyoming, and many of those camps were used from, indigenous people to Japanese Americans, and of course today for people who are removed from the southern border and separated, of course, many of them families. So it's quite the norm in American history is sort of what I want to establish, and whether it was thinking about the pipeline or anything. And moreover, I think one of the things that all of your presence here is that there's both the entrepreneurship and resistance, right? And this sort of creative resistance that goes on and still goes on and on and on. And that this, is something that I see in each of you. And how are you going to tell this story so we're not also in a state of constant anger, And so one of the things, and I'll get back to a little bit more, but one of the things that I really love about Naila's film is that the having you in it, right, and your families is the breath, where I can literally hear the breath. I can feel the power, the beauty, the joy, as well as these amazing moments when, I guess it's underneath the highway. And we're recounting where Dreamland was, right? Williams Dreamland. And the cars are going overhead. And each time they pass, it feels like a lashing. And yet he's there standing tall. And it's this constant, I'm sure you're conscious of it, Naila, but it's such beautiful, present, evocative filmmaking that, I grew up, on the Lower East Side, and my dad was in the South Bronx, and that highway, that cross Bronx highway that made all those images of the South Bronx. And then people talk about, those people are burning up. This was a neighborhood. This was a community, a thriving, beautiful community that through eminent domain was taken again. And so I say that everywhere in this country, people have these experiences, or may wonder, well, why are those people so, like, why don't they take care of themselves? Or there's a story, a narrative that gets created. And if you don't know any better, you feel like you don't deserve better. And so going back to the hearkening and bringing out history, for me, what that moment under the bridge does is to sort of say, to decolonize your mind and be present in these places where these land lynchings have occurred, so to speak. And if you, I guess the Blockers as the descendants, I would love for you to sort of, I know that's a lot to sort of think about, but really how you all figured out, in this telling, what would be the joy that you would show, or the strength, or the resilience. And so I guess this is a question both to the Blockers and then to Naila about how you show that and why I feel it so powerfully. And then we can get into more specifics about this film itself.
You want me to go? I'll go first, Michelle. Is that okay? Well, my sister and I talked about this. I think, and Byron actually alluded to it during one of our brainstorming sessions, talking about this. I think it kind of uncovered some trauma that we didn't even realize because our families didn't talk about it. We knew our great-grandmother owned a business, and we didn't make the connection about Black Wall Street. We didn't talk about the massacre or anything. So I think that participating uncovered some of that trauma. And I realized that, I wonder if in your DNA that internalized trauma almost gives someone that resistance or fear of trying and going for more, because there's this innate fear of it being taken away or torn down again. So why build something up, because they might just come and tear it down anyway. So I started thinking about that since we've been doing this work. And I think that's why I keep harping on, we have to focus on the hope and what made Black Wall Street successful, that community. And if one person is doing well, everyone is doing well, and reinvesting and spending money in the community. As Chief said, it wasn't that we were forced to do it. We wanted to do it. So I guess for me, if the joy of it is celebrating what our great grandmother accomplished then, which would be amazing now, and celebrating that rich history of the strength and resilience of women. You mentioned, Rachel, about how we just keep going. And I always think about that sometimes. Like, I'm in awe of the strong women in my family. No matter what, they keep going, and they do it standing tall and proud and regal. And I do think that that is something that is passed on. It's internalized. So I guess for me, the joy of it is know the greatness from which you come and be proud of that. Be proud of your community. Don't litter your community. Find ways to diversify your streams of income and contribute. Don't tear down your community. So I think that's why it's so important to know what once existed, to give the youth and other people in the community the hope and the desire to want to rebuild that again. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, it did, for sure. And any answer that you want to give is the right one, quite frankly.
That's right.
Michelle, would you like to speak to this as well, please?
I talking about something that is so, devastating. I think that Ms. Jefferson did a fantastic job at highlighting the tragedy of it, but then, through cement, a flower can grow. And I feel like she did a really good job at showing the resilience. Not that, oh, we just smiled and got through it, but that's strength that it takes to find some type of hope and joy within yourself to withstand what's around you and what happened. And I feel like that's why you were able to come away from this documentary not feeling just that overbearing feeling of, sadness, but you get the information, but there's this glimmer of hope, and that's exactly why Black Wall Street got rebuilt. That glimmer of hope is what people held on to. And I think that she did a fantastic job in the documentary showing that. And I think that's why that part at the, the table with my mother and my sister is so wonderful, going through the pictures, because that hope and joy has been passed on. Absolutely, there is a generational trauma, but that hope of resilience is in us as well. So,
if I may,
I can see it.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I want to say I really appreciate you all talking about this, especially those of us who are descendants on the call. I'm sending a virtual hug to everybody, because we do carry the effects, both good and bad, right? And what I'm hearing now is a balance of both the good and the bad of the situation. And we just on a personal level, I find joy in a different way, right? And I think I'm thinking about what's been passed on to us. My grandfather, my great aunt, and my great uncle were all three survivors. and they barely escaped with their lives. My great uncle was a fighter. He fought in the Greenwood battle. He went all the way to LA, and he gave birth to his fifth child, was named Stymie Beard of the Little Rascals. And if you ever seen the Little Rascals, he's the kid with the black top hat. And I'm like, it's no wonder that I'm consulting in film today, But what's interesting is I'm on the Mass Graves Oversight Committee, and we've been excavating remains for the past couple of weeks. Last week we found 7 children. Today we found a woman who was 7 months pregnant when she was placed in a mass grave. Today I've been thinking about, in this conversation, thinking about what's the joy in that. And I think the joy is we get to bring them home. We finally get to bring them home. I was at a screening today with Ayanna Baraka, another Black filmmaker, and I could barely sit through it, because I was still carrying her with me and that baby. And I thought about, our job as men, how we need to be we need to be excellent, right, in how we protect and respect our female counterparts. And I think today was a huge example of that. And just to be able to, take those bones out of the earth where Tulsa thought they could really cover up our history, to me, that's a joy. It's a joy knowing that we're going to continue this work, even as survivors, like you all have mentioned. We move forward, we move ahead, and we don't step backwards, and if we do, somebody is behind us to catch us. And I think what we represent by being here is that joy, like whatever our ancestors were thinking, and making sure that one day you're going to be able to tell this story in a place that's safe enough for you to actually tell it in. And we should find great comfort in that. I mean, we really should, because it's an honor to be in this position. So thank you all.
We don't have to whisper, and we don't have to shout. We can just say the truth, our truth.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms.
Right.
Naila.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from this experience is us reclaiming our stories, right? Reclaiming our narratives, empowering ourselves that way. It's important that Black people tell Black stories, or else it will not be told in the frame and with the perspective through the lens that it's supposed to be told through. And I think that's what happened with the story of the Tulsa Race Massacre, and why for so many years it was the Tulsa Race Riot. And so I'm happy that now we're in a place where descendants can take ownership and tell the stories from that event that are important to them. So we can center it on the joy, we can center it on the brilliance, we can center it on the resilience, if you like, the freedom, whatever it may be, but whatever you want that takeaway to be. I feel like now you have the power to do that. And Chief, I know Ayanna. I've seen her film about Greenwood, and she's just representative of those Black filmmakers using their power to then empower the community to take back the narrative. And not just from a storytelling, from a filmmaking point of view, it's just even how we think of ourselves, right? What images do we want reflected back at us? All of that is important. And when you were talking, Jacqueline, about what you can only see, you only know what you can see. Is that what it was? Or you can only see what you can see? I got it. But
yeah, we got it.
Making sure that they see things that we were a part of before. And that if we can come out of it, if we can grow a Black Wall Street 50 years removed from slavery, oh my goodness, we can overcome anything. And so that's what I love about telling these stories and the truth about these stories. And again, not just centering them on the bad that came out of it, but showing the strength and the resilience, and even in a way, how to reclaim and how to move forward, and know that we can do it again.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Naila, when I talked about, I guess, Black joy, Black love, and the resilience, there are moments when I think it's Byron who says, Black Wall Street was iconic. It was beautiful. It was Black. And I said, I might make a T-shirt that says that, and a mantra, but I have to be able to look at it because I think, that is to say, I think that all the time, right? In terms of things being beautiful and being Black, but it also needs to be out there. And there are moments that are so poetic. The Reverend, I had to ask Michelle, I said, did you write all that? Like each part felt it's the filmmaking is reflective and present at the same time. I mean, I'm going to be studying you because it is such a masterful way of working, where there's like an element of the choreo poem and our inner thoughts being externalized so beautifully through Byron's poetry. And Michelle, you're also you're a performance artist as well. Is that correct? Yeah. So, I mean, co-sign with me here. I would just say because it's so elegantly, just gotta shout out the filmmaker.
You know what? Can I say something? I mean, I was able to capture it, but those are their words. I didn't write one thing for them to say. And again, I think that just speaks to the point to giving people space to tell their stories. These are things that were locked within them. And they just didn't have, or maybe they did, but not on camera. They hadn't yet had the opportunity to share it. And again, it speaks to the power of filmmaking. It could have been a conversation that they just had with me, but fortunately we were able to put it in a medium that's then blasted all over. And people are able to hear just how much this means to these families. Again, it is not an event that just happened 100 years ago. They carry the pride, they carry the joy, but they also carry the pain. And there's also something about, the pain of your ancestors, the injustice that they were they were forced to undergo, not being able to reconcile that and not being able to voice that, just constantly being suppressed. That's just more violence on top of violence. And so it's important. And like you said, you can hear it in the way that they spoke about it. These are things that they thought about, that are on their minds and in their hearts. And again, I'm just happy that we were able to work together and have the space to share it so that it just drives the point home of how important it is to tell these stories and also to continue to move forward to a place of reconciliation.
I'm going to hop in and say, watching the film, it was pretty amazing. Both my sister and I, after seeing it, there were so many things that I don't even remember saying. And so you were right. Like somehow you gave us that space to say things because when watching the documentary, it was so beautiful. And I don't even remember saying half the things that you captured. And it was just perfect and beautiful. So yeah, it was very organic. And I think you're right, just being able to have that opportunity to speak things that I didn't even know were inside of me actually, or things that have been spinning around. We hadn't had the opportunity to really share. So thank you again for that.
Well, thank you for sharing them. But I'll say one other thing that I think happens in our community a lot. Our stories are so suppressed, we don't realize how important they are. Right? And so we just buy into, I'm not saying that everyone here does that, but I'm just saying sometimes it happens. We can buy into the notion that it's been told, it doesn't need to be heard again. We need to move on. But no, people have to face this truth. And so again, I just encourage us to continue, because beyond Descended from a Promised Land, there might be something else that you want to add to the conversation, or something else that comes up. It's important. Our history is important, and no matter what they're trying to do with this ridiculous law and critical race theory, they're saying that it needs to be outlawed and taken out of schools. We just have to continue to fight and press forward, because it's only our history. It's only our history that makes them uncomfortable. But what about the parts of history that make us uncomfortable, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Exactly. And that's what we need to use this film to use, is people have to get involved and know what's going on, and really know what's going on. and
That's
get
right.
involved and hold our lawmakers and our community leaders and everyone accountable, and know who your DAs are. I mean, all of this fits together. I'm sorry to say this, Michelle, don't get annoyed with me, but I have to bring this in. We went from Black Wall Street to having all of these very wealthy Black towns and settlements to being the highest incarcerator of Blacks. It's not an accident. It's not a coincidence. And so we have to be involved in having documentaries like this, to have this history captured, and to make sure that people know and they can't stop talking. You're right. I do feel like sometimes we mute ourselves. I think I have muted myself for a while, and this film has actually inspired me to not do it anywhere anymore. So you're right about that. I don't think enough, not everyone, like you said, but not enough of us think our stories are important, and all of our stories are important.
Yeah, very
That's
much.
right. Good, thanks.
I mean, speaking to this point that you raised, right? How do you go from being one of the most prosperous places in the country to having the highest incarceration? It's not like people just suddenly decide they're going to be criminals. You know, it is not possible, right? So I think that is a point in terms of what were some of those systemic institutions, barriers, enforcements only on us, our bodies. And by us, I mean, it can be, there's a broad swath of us, given my own family's internment as Japanese American. And then my dad is Biafran, by the way. So those pictures of bloated Africans with bloated bellies and flies, that is my family's legacy in Nigeria. And what does that mean, right? If that was also a land grab based on oil and the Delta. So always look for what is the cause of the massacre, or in that case, they even call it a genocide. And this is a genocide, which people are starting to say. Because I think, you know, if we go into that transference, right, of wealth and excellence to a story of incarceration, it doesn't make sense. Would we imprison ourselves? You know, how does that happen?
Thank you. Because I'm just itching with this one, and I'm going to share something most people have probably never heard, right? So I just take this with you, right? So we can understand. Earlier, my sister said, when we don't learn from the past, we recycle it, right? And history is literally, not figuratively, literally recycling itself. Oh, so follow me here. In March of 1920, Greenwood and many of its political advocates convinced the Black citizens of Greenwood to convert from Republican to Democrat. They said all of the Klan ran the Democratic Party, right? That's where all the power structure was situated, inside the Democratic Party. They convinced all the Black people in Greenwood, most of them, to convert to Democrat. When they did it literally in 1 month. April of 1920, when the election was about to occur, they had created an entire political ticket from the mayor down to the lowest commissioner. They owned their ticket. They could finance their politicians, right? What they did was so remarkable. When the election came in April of 1920, they only lost the entire ticket by 205 votes. After that, they spent the next 12 months criminalizing the inhabitants of Greenwood. All the newspaper articles, if you research the newspaper articles, they all talk about Greenwood being a cesspool and prostitution and gambling and drugs and all of this, right? They had to convince the world, all of Oklahoma, that Greenwood was this cesspool that we didn't want white folks spending their money in, right? Because white people were coming and spending money in Greenwood, getting loans from Greenwood, right? This is the whole missing element. And now we're dealing with voter suppression, because I look at historical parallels. And we're looking at being at the face of that again. So now, when we don't, I mean, thank you, sister. You put it on point when you said we recycle history when we don't learn from it. We are literally going through that same cycle again. We've already gone through coronavirus. We had Spanish flu then. What happened after Spanish flu? You had a downturn in economics. Same thing in 1921 for them. Then what happened after that? You have the bloody summer of 1919. What happened in 2020? You had riots across the nation. See, everything is being recycled. We're just, when we don't know the history of the past, we don't understand the cycle we're in. And then we don't know how to counter it and prevent those things from happening. So now we have what Oklahoma is now second in the nation for leading in incarceration after Louisiana. We were first. But we're looking at that cycle of history. And so when we ask ourselves, how do we go from that to that? All you have to do is look at the history, look at the cycles, and look at how they repeat themselves. Anytime fear, the fear of us gaining back our hope, gaining back our humanity, gaining back our financial prowess, gaining back our political independence, when you see those things start to rise, you also need to look for what's going to happen to counter it. Now we got racial theory bills being passed, critical race theory bills being passed. Now you got anti-protest bills being passed. You see, you got all of these bills being passed that are designed to basically keep us in our place, right? And we just can't fall for the hypnosis. That's the thing, right? We really have to understand historically how we have to look at the parallels and actually identify them. 2021, 1921, and look at the parallels. Then we can figure out how to counter these measures, right? Just like us going through what we're going through now as descendants. There is a cycle even with that, right? When we came to Oklahoma, we were detoxing from all of the madness that we were going through. This is therapeutic for those of us who are descendants. Like, in many ways, every time we get an opportunity to speak to each other, we actually are able to detoxify ourselves from things that we weren't even aware we were holding on to, right? And then at the end of the conversation, we're like, man, why do I feel lighter, right? We feel lighter because we actually got a chance to purge stuff that we didn't even know that's in our epigenetics, right? That was deep in our core. And that's what makes these opportunities really brilliant. We just got to wake up to the historical parallels.
Yes. And I do think there is something about, like, I have seen so many Holocaust films, and they're important to an understanding of what genocide is and what that dehumanization is. I've seen lots of, not enough probably, but films about, enslaved people. But what I really want to see is how people who are barraged by bombs and planes and have built all these things have the wherewithal, to defend themselves. And in fact, the defending themselves was why people are so angry. Their prosperity, their very being of standing tall is what angered people and needed to be destroyed as an example. And so I look at, I guess the part that is the role the media plays, right? If we go back, your film really deals with the resilience. And the part that, in terms of the actual massacre, right, what the role that the press played, the newspapers, as well as amazing journalists like Ida B. Wells, who was able to call forth and call on people to defend themselves. And I know she had a role. She was one of my heroes, as a young person, reading some of her articles and understanding what that took to stand up against lynchings, all over. And who today, to me, Naila, like, this film is sort of, you play a role in that. And, the people who are spoken word artists, what is that responsibility to tell the truth? Because for me, she was just one of the great, speak what was happening and to develop a strategy for resistance as a journalist, as an activist, going to Washington, doing all those. And since we're with the March on Washington Film Festival, thinking about ourselves as large as possible and being able to spread these messages.
I lost you for a minute, Rachel, but can you just sum up the question for me? I lost you for a second there.
Oh, sure. I was just thinking, in terms of your role as a filmmaker, right? And I think about, I'm not sure where journalism has gone, right? But looking at how the role the press played in instigating the massacre, as well as on the flip side, a journalist like Ida B. Wells, who was, there were all the context of the returning Black soldiers from World War One, of course, who were also armed and proud, had fought for their nation. And so this confluence of the time that Chief Amundsen has said, 100 years ago, we can reflect on this. And then today, thinking about who plays those roles. For me, you're one of those people. But, is that a valid point, or who else can be allies? Because in these efforts, we need a lot of people. So who do you, and then I would ask each of you, see as allies within this, whether they're journalists, filmmakers, educators, all these different ways that we can strategize and create allyship.
Well, yeah, I think filmmaking is a powerful tool. Like I said, we can tell these stories. These stories can go farther than we ever thought because of the power of film and the power of media. Filmmakers, storytellers of all sorts, journalists to a degree if they're interested in telling a true story. That's actually one of the reasons why I didn't pursue journalism, because I realized, you can put a spin on it, you can put a slant on it. And we're seeing that now. We see that in the press every day. But I think, it's each person's responsibility to try and do their best to find the truth, and to play their part. But I want to go back to something you said, Chief, about making those parallels. I think you're absolutely right. Of course, with the election of President Obama, that's when we really started to see a huge push with white resistance. And then, of course, we saw who came after him. So you're absolutely right. And I think one of the big themes that I'm seeing throughout history, as far as it relates to Black progress and Black success, is that it's always met with over-policing, right? So there were the laws that were put in place when Black people started to own the land, the oil-populated land in Oklahoma. And then what was the law that you mentioned where they had to have,
guardianship.
There you go, they had to have guardianship, right, to inhibit our progress. I mean, we see it again and again and again. And then, of course, the over-policing of Black people now, that's why we are in a place where we are with over-incarceration. I kind of want to be a little bit careful about our use of kind of criminals and criminalizing certain people, because, I mean, you're only labeled as a criminal if the person in power says that you're a criminal, right? And we just have to be careful about using the language of oppressors to describe our own people. So yeah, we can't feed into the mindset. We can't feed into those power structures that do not serve us at all. But I think going forward, we have to continue to tell those stories and the truth about those stories, and looking beyond the labels that they give us, the definitions that they give us. We just have to dig deeper, because it's always about policing us in our progress and our perception of ourselves.
And if I may, if that was in reference to my use of the word, let me explain. I was speaking of it from a historical context. What I was meaning, what I was expressing is that factually, every newspaper article and headline was created in order to, they were using that as a tool to criminalize. So I was just explaining the narrative that was being created through the use of the media, and how they were using newspaper articles, propaganda, basically using propaganda to create this, kind of like Birth of a Nation did, right? Birth of a Nation pretty much did the same thing. The media at that time period, almost every article after 1920 was designed to create a psychology of criminalization, so that those people who were in control of the media, like you said, they controlled the media. at least the dominant media of the day. Not that we didn't have our own media, but the idea was, how do you get 10,000 white men to descend on Greenwood unless you convince them to falsely believe that Greenwood is a criminal or a criminal community, right? And so that's what I was meaning by that.
I wasn't referring to what you were saying.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was the case.
Yeah, I was talking about the mass incarceration, but I you know, I'm very careful not to call people slaves versus enslaved people, right?
Yes,
so,
I do, yeah.
You know, and the same is, you know, every week in my neighborhood, there are people that I know and I know their families, and they disappear for what? For something someone is selling on Fifth Avenue, and, you know, or Madison Avenue, and I'm talking about the green substances, right? Versus the pharmacies. So yes, what is criminalization, what is legal, is determined by who is in power, right? And who benefits. And Black bodies being forced to work for no money is something that benefits someone, not ourselves, clearly. So yeah, it's, you know, I could speak to this in a more harsh way. I mean, I've been on so many demonstrations from childhood, and, you know, demanding things that are basic rights like books, you know, or to not have racist pedagogy taught in our school systems, you know. And this is ongoing, right? And there's always pushback with a few different kind of handouts. So thinking about what's happening now, right? It could be wonderful. Could, you know, we should push for the discussions, you know, and I would love to hear your thoughts about reparations and all that. But all these things happened, you know, in the 60s as well. You know, if you want to just take one thing about desegregating the schools, right? And community board control, all these things that we fought to get some of these stories in our curriculum, or bilingual education, or any number of things. And how do we prevent the things that are like a trade-off, right? Where you get these buyouts, you know, or you get all the Blacks being moved from Republican to Democrat, or, you know, Mayor Lindsay famously courted, you know, Republican who courted the Black vote, and, you know, the very famous, you know, park that Quest loves, you know, the big Harlem Arts Festival, that was to court the Black vote, quite frankly, right? And so, and it worked. And then, you know, they appointed some people, and then everything was squashed. So I think, you know, that is another thing to be, how do we create sustainable change, you know, in this conversation? And what is it, I guess, from each of you that you would like to see? I know there's a larger picture, and there's an impact campaign around awareness that Odyssey has, and awareness of this centennial for the Tulsa Race Massacre, and general education. What is it that, you know, we talked about the importance of education, but I guess, I say this, how do you think that will change things for people when they know this? You know, how would it have changed your lives to know these things going on? And whether it's, you know, through critical thinking, or what difference does it make is what I'm saying. I think it makes a lot of difference, but I'd like to hear from you, because some people will say that.
To me, it makes a huge difference, because as I drive around and see the names of families on stadiums and buildings and streets, I feel like there should be other names that should be there. The entrepreneurs that did own businesses and land on Black Wall Street. But more importantly, it's not just the money, it's a seat at the table, because what that family legacy buys you is the opportunity to influence policy, and to influence how infrastructure and the zoning and all of that. So the massacre did more. It massacred lives, it massacred legacy, and it fostered a sense of community. So why does it matter? It matters because now people that should have a rightful say-so on what actually happens in redeveloping Black Wall Street and the community around it don't have a seat at the table in making any decisions about that. And that's going to take time. So for me, policy, being able to influence policy, teaching people about the importance of getting involved and learning how to influence policy and advocate the right way, that's why this matters. And then also learning from an early age about how to own your own business, about financial responsibility, about investments. The Black community and Black Wall Street was very in tune with all of that. Like you said, we rebuilt from rubble with no help from the city, with no reimbursement from the city. That took all kinds of talent coming together. And so is what needs to come from this, is the fact that we need to teach our youth about the importance of diversifying income streams, entrepreneurship, investing, knowing your history. And it's not about, having the best photo on Instagram or whatever social media. We've got to get them focused on what's really important. And that's building your own kind of self-wealth and having pride in yourself. So it is very important. It matters a lot. And to connect the dots about how much this is still going on to this day right now, I'm so glad you mentioned about we need to watch the narrative about how we refer to people as criminals. And, I'm very intentional about saying that that's an individual who committed an act that's statutorily defined as a crime in this particular state. They're not a criminal. This is what happened. So I'm very sensitive to that. But to this day, when we talk about victims and protecting those, Black women in Oklahoma who are victims of sexual assault have received zero from the Victims Compensation Fund. There's studies going on right now. Black women, and the reason for that is contributory action, which means they're saying that a Black woman asked to be sexually assaulted. Zero. Not a single Black woman who has filed a complaint of sexual assault has received anything from Victims Compensation in Oklahoma. So in connecting the dots about the attitudes of how people look at Black women and look at Black people in Oklahoma, these attitudes still continue and will continue if we don't know the history. And it's not just for Black people to know the history. All people need to know this history. So it is incredibly important. The ripple effects continue and are snowballing if we don't come together and educate and make a change and know what's going on and find ways to advocate and get involved.
Absolutely.
That information sitting with me.
Yeah.
I just found out this week. I'm sorry. I literally just found out on a call yesterday about that. And so I'm saying it everywhere I am because it's outrageous and it speaks to a bigger problem. And how Black people are viewed and Black women are viewed. And for me, all of it's a direct result of stripping that. You see the pictures and you see all the Black women looking just beautiful and regal. And now we're asking to be sexually assaulted. Do you know, for me, the connection is undeniable, and it's a stripping away of something, an attempt to strip away. And our being able to speak will stop that ability for them to strip that greatness away from us.
It puts us in jeopardy physically, and always has. I mean, honestly, this country is built on the rape of Black women. So that is a useful narrative to have out there, that we ask for these things, that we don't say no, that it's not possible to rape us. And I would argue many people would say that about women in general, often, except for white women who are put on a pedestal. And we can get into all of that another time, of what that comes from. But, whether there's scarcity, the narrative, many reasons. And you're from New Orleans, so that has its own Rand history around.
Yeah.
This is a history around Indigenous women, Black women. My mother would be assumed a whore because she was with a Black man. And so this is a narrative that, I think still affects people. If you walk down, the street as a Black woman, are you safe? Do people think you're enraged? And you know what? If I were really as mad as I should be, watch out. I mean, I'm always like, I'm really not as angry in any way as I'm warranted to be. Any of us are warranted. And, but getting away from that, I would say the thing that your legacy is your mother, your grandmother, your great parents, and just blown away by the fortitude, the ingenuity, the creativity, the generosity of your family. And even now, you see it's in your DNA, much more, it seems, than the trauma. And so that's the part of the joy and the resilience that I would say is just here as, kind of education warriors, so to speak, in many ways. And I want to talk about, since, this is both we're talking about generational, the Black Wall Street, and you are descendants, generational inheritance and wealth, and you spoke to what that influence is, right? If you're Bill Gates, obviously you can do a lot with the Gates Foundation or the, various. So Black Wall Street for many epitomized the American dreams, right? As African Americans were able to achieve financial success, we talked about earlier. And there are communities now grappling with whether financial achievement through capitalism is still attainable. What are your thoughts on how this film sheds light on this conversation? And I'm not sure which one of you might like, but I would just say to both Jacqueline and Michelle, I address this to you as the descendants of Black Wall Street in the film.
Well, I actually, if you don't mind, would like to go back on the importance of why this film is so important. And then I'll try to answer that question. I just wanted to emphasize the fact that this story has been held in the mouths of people, not our people, but other people. And that story got passed on and trivialized, called a riot. And now this story is finally being in the hands of the people and the people of descendants, people that know the true story, people like Chief that have done their education. And now we as people, I feel like, need to be the storytellers. That's right. And completely emphasize to everyone the real true story. Even though it's 100 years later, it's important. And that's why this film is important, because the story is, I feel like it's ours again. And we are able to tell the true story. Whether it's very difficult for people to hear and swallow, it's the truth.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And as far as, it's really difficult sometimes for me to talk about the financial aspect of it, because it's so much more than that. It's so much more than reparations. Mm-hmm. And so I truly don't have an answer of amount that would be, or a building, because it is so much more than that. Who can put a price on what my great-grandmother's business would be today if it stayed in the family? Who could put a price on that? So I think through education and really sticking with this massacre and doing the things that so many people are doing, as far as trying to figure out where the bodies have been and things like that. I feel like we're getting close to maybe discussing trying to get reparations. But as of now, it just seems so much bigger than that to me.
Jacqueline?
Whether or not we think the capitalism is an option for Black wealth. It is, but it has to be our own terms. Like, we can't do it within, I think, the established infrastructure. It would have to be based upon kind of the same kind of platform that made Black Wall Street and other Black communities like it successful around the United States at that time. I don't know that if we do it within the current structure, it has to be from top to bottom.
That's right.
Black folk. And so for me, I kind of feel like we need to figure out how to do it on our own, because at some point I feel like you're going to run into still having to ask someone else who is in charge of the status quo for some kind of permission or access to that level. I get so many levels, and then there's still that one door where, nope, almost Jacqueline, but just no, not this time. So I feel like that's the kind of same way for Black wealth and capitalism. We need to find ways to create our own structures. I thought that Harper Hill, when he came into town with their whole idea about the cryptocurrency and trying to get Black folks to understand that and to invest in that, I love ideas like that. I think that we need to try and figure out more ways to create our own wealth and not have to ask permission and do it through other infrastructures. So my answer is yes, but it has to be reimagined in order for it to be truly a Black wealth for all. And I truly believe it needs to be Black wealth for all, because I'm concerned that now we are even creating a bigger gap amongst Black people with those that are doing well and those that aren't. And that's unsettling for me. I think that we need to try and make sure that there's opportunities for all of us. So yes, but it needs to be reimagined.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Do any of you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I do. As a plaintiff on the current lawsuit we have for respect, restitution, and repair, and having gone to Congress to speak about this particular issue, I think I agree. The conversation is happening in a lot of circles, right? And it is being reimagined. And we have people who you spoke about allies earlier. You know, that was been a big issue for me. Like, why isn't the Jewish community speaking up for us? Why isn't the Japanese community speaking up for us? And it was like, I kid you not, it was like 30 days later, all of a sudden, I'm getting this outpour of emails from Human Rights Watch and different other organizations saying, hey, guess who just jumped on board, who want to help us with this collective? You know, the members of the Japanese reparations committee and members of the Jewish Holocaust, committees. All these people are coming forward to help us with the language, right? And how we imagine these things. And so everybody has this habit of asking me, what does reparations look like for you? Right? And my first response, emotional response, is insult. But my intellectual response is, if you take everything, you have to give back everything. I shouldn't have to marginalize this experience or categorize, right? If I had money in the bank, then you restore the money that was in the bank with interest. If I had land, then you restore land, right? It's so holistic. This type of repair has to be holistic. It can't be categorized into one specific form, right? Because they didn't just take money, they didn't just take property, they didn't just take land. Everything was taken, right? So if you take everything needs to be given back. And then you think about, what does that look like reimagined? Like, what would that look like today? I can say my son, who is in college, would not have debt, right? I could come up with all kind of things or subject matters to apply to this or mental health services, right? I could think of a barrage of things that we could utilize to make that a holistic experience, because part of the word reparations includes repair, right? We're talking about repair. We're talking about reparatory justice and trying to repair are wrong, right? All of us in this space probably have some form of insurance. If we lost whatever we have insured, we want whatever we lost back. We're not going to deny anything. In fact, we're going to demand that we get everything we deserve from what was owed to us, right? Because we're paying for a service. Well, we paid more than just for a service when Greenwood burned. We still paying for it, right? Today, we're still paying for what that looks like. So when we think about this, how do we repair Greenwood? Or how do we repair the mindset, the psychology of those people? Because this wasn't individual trauma. This was collective trauma. And those of us who still live here, we feel it, smell it, breathe it, right? And we can see it. It's tangible. And so, and I think, again, that's one of the things that made the film so good, because you took the voices of descendants, right? We've already had the stories of survivors. My grandfather was part of the original lawsuit in 2003. So I've been part of this process for an extremely long time. I mean, I was half the age I am now. And I'm not telling my age, but I'm half that. I was half that starting this fight. And I want those of us in this space to know that you are worthy of every form of repair that is due to us, right? There is no aspect. We don't have to just say you owe us restitution in the form of compensation or monetary funds. It's much, like the sister said, it's deeper than that, but it's inclusive of that, right? We're looking at that from a holistic perspective, so that we're not talking like think about all the subject matters we talked about in this conversation, whether it was education, incarceration, political disfranchisement. These are all the things that we lost. Every subject that we've talked about is everything that we lost. We have to figure out how to repair it. Even when we use the word reconciliation, we're still using someone else's language, because we have to reconcile before we can reconcile. We've never reconciled, right? It's just us saying, we even have to reimagine the conversation, right? Like how we talk about this massacre. How we talk about this.
You're making a good point. I'm sorry to cut you off, but everything that you're saying to me, I'm just like, one thing that's kind of been a little sticker. I know we're running on time, but the fact that we're being asked what do we want, and why are we having to figure this out, right? Like, what you said, you knew it was burned. So once again, we're being asked to figure it out, and we're having to do all the work in order to get something that was stolen. And so, and that's the only reason why I had to cut you off, because everything you're saying, it's like, well, what do you want? Why are we having to even,
that's right.
Why are we having to figure this out? It was destroyed.
That's right.
It's documented. But yet, once again, we're being asked to figure this out. We have to put it in a nice, pretty bow for them and give it to them in the language that they want, that's acceptable. And then maybe.
Yes. Indeed.
Well, I thank all of you. I think this discussion obviously is an ongoing one, and it will evolve through time. And Naila, I thank you for making the film so beautifully and sparking these conversations. Many, many, many more to come. Jacqueline and Michelle, just kudos to both of you and your beautiful family, your great grandmother, your mother. Is such a pleasure to speak with you today and to learn more about you and your family through the film. So keep on with all the amazing things you're doing. And Chief Amason, really, hats off, man. I'm gonna try to follow what you're doing, all of you, and echo the sentiment. So we have our own struggles here in New York City, but they are, maybe some of the specifics are different, but really the fight is the same. So in alignment with you here, many miles away. And with that, I would love to turn it over and thank again the March on Washington Film Festival, and for giving us this place, this opportunity, and of course to transform films and Odyssey Impact. And David will tell you a bit more about that, what's coming up. So look forward to seeing you all in person, hopefully soon.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Rachel, thank you so very much. And thank you as well to all of our guests. What an important and vital discussion, but also one that was moving and poetic and strong. If you felt the same way, and if you would like to host a screening of the film, our friends at Odyssey Impact are doing a year-long social impact campaign. And you can find out more if you go to odyssey-impact.org. Again, odyssey-impact.org. We also hope that you'll visit us at marchonwashingtonfilmfestival.org to find out more about the fest that takes place the first week of October this year. If you happen to be here in Washington, D.C., we'd love to see you at our live events, but you can stream our films from really anywhere in the world, and we hope that you will. You can also find out more on our social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter. On behalf of our panelists, our friends at Odyssey Impact, thank you so much for being here tonight. Be well, see you in the fall, and good night.